For thousands of years, Europe believed Latvia was ordinary, a small nation beside the Baltic Sea, cold forests, frozen rivers, Kiev villages, nothing unusual. But then something changed. Scientists began studying Latvian DNA. At first, they expected a simple European ancestry, normal migration patterns, predictable genetics, nothing mysterious. They were wrong. Because hidden inside Latvian genomes, researchers found traces from populations that should never have survived there, ancient hunter tribes, lost northern bloodlines, genetic markers older than most modern European nations, and one strange signature appearing again and again, a signature connected to people who lived near the Baltic thousands of years ago. Long before Latvia even existed, no one expected what came next. The deeper scientists looked, stranger the story became. Some DNA samples matched populations from deep, prehistoric Europe. Others carried traces linked to ancient Siberian migrations, two completely different worlds mixed together inside one modern population. And that raised a terrifying question. Who were the original Latvians? Because the official story sounded simple, Baltic tribes settled the region, languages evolved, kingdoms rose and collapsed. End of story. But the DNA refused to cooperate. The numbers kept pointing backward. Further backward, past medieval Europe, past the Roman world, past written history itself, researchers started realizing something disturbing. Latvia had preserved genetic patterns the rest of Europe had already lost, almost erased everywhere else, but somehow still alive there, buried inside isolated villages, inside family bloodlines. Protected by forests, winters, and centuries of isolation, what they found shocked everyone. The Baltic region was never just another corner of Europe, it was a genetic time capsule. A living museum of ancient humanity, and this is where the story gets strange, because during the Ice Age, huge parts of northern Europe were uninhabitable, entire regions disappeared beneath glaciers. Most human populations fled south, but when the ice finally retreated, people returned, or at least, that was the theory. Scientists believed new settlers slowly repopulated the Baltic coastline. Simple, clean, logical, until ancient skeletons started appearing, bodies buried beneath Latvian soil, some over 7,000 years old. Their DNA was extracted carefully, tested repeatedly, verified again and again. And the results made researchers uncomfortable. Those ancient people were not fully related to later European farmers. They belonged to older hunter population, groups thought to be mostly extinct. Yet parts of their DNA still survived inside modern Latvians, not symbolically, not culturally, literally. Inside living people, that changed everything. Because it meant Latvia preserved one of Europe's oldest surviving genetic layers, a layer older than many kingdoms, older than borders, older than nations themselves. But there was another problem. The ancestry did not fully match neighboring countries. Lithuania showed differences, Scandinavia showed differences, Central Europe looked even more distant, Latvia seemed isolated genetically. Almost protected, like history had moved around it, instead of through it, and researchers could not explain why. Wars crossed the region constantly. Empires invaded repeatedly. German crusaders arrived. Swedish armies marched through. Russian rulers dominated for centuries. So why did the ancient genetic structure survive? Why wasn't it erased? That question haunted researchers. Because normally, conquest changes populations, bloodlines shift, DNA mixes rapidly, but Latvia remained strangely stable, like something had preserved the older ancestry beneath the surface. Then researchers discovered another clue, one connected to the coastline. Ancient Baltic hunter communities, some survived near forests and rivers for thousands of years, far longer than expected. Even after farming spread across Europe, they resisted change, they stayed separate, and over time, their descendants became part of the Latvian population itself, not fully replaced, not wiped out. Absorbed slowly, quickly generation after generation, and that explained part of the mystery, but not all of it, because there was still one genetic marker scientists could not fully understand. A marker appearing at unusual frequencies, linked to extremely old northern populations, rare across Europe. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel, yet strangely persistent in the Baltic region. Some researchers believed it reflected isolation. Others suspected ancient migration waves nobody had fully mapped yet. And that question has never been fully answered. The deeper scientists investigated, the darker the story became, because DNA does not care about borders, it does not care about flags, or empires. It remembers everything, even when humans forget. And buried inside Latvian DNA was the memory of a world that vanished thousands of years ago, a world of hunter tribes moving through frozen forests, a world before castles, before kings. Before recorded civilization reached the Baltic, for centuries, nobody knew those people still existed genetically. But they did, hid in silence, hid in blood. Waiting for science to finally uncover them, researchers across Europe started paying attention, because Latvia was no longer just another country in the genetic map. It was becoming an anomaly. A place where ancient DNA survived almost untouched, and once that realization spread, new investigations began. Universities from Germany, Sweden, and the United Kingdom joined Baltic studies. Archaeologists reopened old burial sites. Ancient skeletons were re-examined. Some had been sitting in museum storage for decades, ignored, forgotten. Now they became evidence. And every new test revealed another contradiction. The official timeline claimed farming transformed Europe completely. Hunter populations were supposed to disappear gradually. Absorbed by incoming farmers from the south, that happened in most places. Spain changed, France changed, Central Europe changed, but Latvia showed resistance. The older ancestry remained unusually strong. As if the forests themselves protected it, scientists started focusing on one terrifying possibility. What if the Baltic region had remained genetically isolated for thousands of years? Not fully isolated, but isolated enough to preserve ancient bloodlines. That idea sounded extreme at first, but the evidence kept building. Ancient graves near the Baltic coastline revealed dietary differences. Many communities continued fishing and hunting long after agriculture spread nearby. They rejected farming traditions for generations, sometimes centuries. That separation mattered, because less interaction meant less genetic mixing, and less mixing meant ancient ancestries survived longer. Suddenly, Latvia no longer looked ordinary. It looked ancient, frozen in time. One researcher described the Baltic populations as windows into prehistoric Europe. Another called them echoes from before civilization. But then something changed. A discovery near an ancient burial site complicated everything again. Archaeologists uncovered remains belonging to a woman buried over 5,000 years ago. Her DNA was extracted carefully. What they found shocked researchers. Part of her ancestry matched Western hunter-gatherer populations, expected, but another part connected to Eastern steppe migrations. Unexpected, two distant worlds inside one person. That should not have happened so early. No one expected what came next. More graves revealed the same pattern, again and again, hunter ancestry. Steppe ancestry mixed together earlier than predicted, which meant ancient population movements across Europe were happening faster than historians believed. And Latvia stood directly in the middle of those movements, a crossroads hidden beneath forests and rivers. But there was another layer to the mystery: language. Latvian belongs to the Baltic language family, one of Europe's oldest surviving language groups. Some linguists believe Baltic languages preserved extremely ancient structures, fragments of prehistoric speech patterns, like fossils trapped inside words. That terrified historians, because if both the genetics and language were unusually ancient, Then Latvia might preserve cultural continuity stretching back thousands of years, far deeper than anyone imagined. And suddenly the question became much larger. Not just, who are the Latvians, but how much of prehistoric Europe still survives inside them? The implications were enormous. Because Europe's history is built on replacement, new kingdoms replacing old tribes, new religions replacing old beliefs, new populations replacing older ones. But Latvia suggested something different. Survival bought permanent continuity, a hidden thread connecting modern people directly to prehistoric Europe. And that thread refused to disappear. Researchers began studying isolated rural communities. Especially regions far from major cities, some villages showed remarkably stable ancestry patterns, families whose genetic signatures remained connected to older Baltic populations, not pure. No population is pure, but preserved, partially protected from massive outside replacement. The forests mattered, the climate mattered, isolation mattered, and wars, strangely enough, may have strengthened that isolation further. Innovating powers controlled cities first, trade routes first, ports first, but deep rural regions often remained quieter. Harder to fully transform, that may have allowed older genetic structures to survive beneath the surface, almost invisible, until modern DNA technology exposed them. And this is where the story gets strange. Because scientists then compared Latvian DNA to ancient remains from neighboring regions, the differences became obvious. Some Scandinavian populations showed stronger later admixture. Central Europe changed dramatically through repeated migration waves, but Latvia retained older northern components at unusual levels, like a memory refusing to die. And that memory carried another secret. One connected to the Ice Age itself. During the last glacial period, much of northern Europe became unlivable. Humans retreated southward, then the ice slowly withdrew. Small groups moved back north. Repopulating empty lands, those groups became some of Europe's earliest northern survivors, and traces of them still exist. Inside Baltic DNA, inside Latvia. Meaning some modern Latvians may carry ancestry connected directly to the first humans who returned after the glaciers vanished, not metaphorically, biologically. That realization changed the emotional weight of the research completely, because now scientists were not simply studying a country, they were studying survival itself. The survival of ancient humanity across impossible conditions. And buried beneath modern Latvia, that survival story was still waiting, hid beneath churches, beneath roads, beneath forgotten cemeteries. Every excavation revealed another clue, every DNA sequence raised another question, and one question kept returning. Why did this genetic continuity survive here, and nowhere else so strongly? Nobody had a complete answer. Some blamed geography, others blamed isolations. Some believed the Baltic Sea acted like a barrier protecting ancient populations. Others suspected cultural separation played a major role, but there was one final possibility researchers rarely discussed openly: luck, pure historical luck. A fragile chain of survival that somehow escaped destruction again and again, because history nearly erased Latvia many times: crusades, plagues, wars, occupations, mass displacement. Yet fragments of ancient ancestry endured through all of it, quietly, silently, generation after generation. And that may be the strangest part of the entire story, not that ancient DNA survived, but that it survived long enough for modern science to finally notice it. Thousands of years hidden in plain sight, inside ordinary people walking modern streets. People who never realized the past still lived inside them, and somewhere beneath the forests of the Baltic coast, more graves still remain undiscovered, more DNA, more answers, and perhaps one final secret. A secret capable of rewriting the origins of Northern Europe itself. For decades, historians believed Europe's story was already complete. The migrations were mapped, the timelines were organized. The origins were explained, at least That was the assumption. Then ancient DNA arrived, and suddenly history stopped looking stable, especially in the Baltic region. Because every new discovery seemed to break another rule. One excavation changed everything. Near the banks of the Daugava River, archaeologists uncovered ancient human remains buried beneath layers of earth and stone. The graves looked simple. No royal treasures, no giant monuments, just silent skeletons resting beneath Latvian soil. But inside those bones was a forgotten history. Scientists extracted DNA carefully. The process took months. Every sample risked contamination. Every result had to be verified repeatedly. And when the data finally returned, the room went silent. The ancestry profile looked older than expected. Much older, parts of it connected to Mesolithic hunter populations. Communities that lived before farming dominated Europe, people who hunted elk through frozen forests, people who traveled rivers in wooden boats, people who watched glaciers disappear from the north. Most researchers assumed those populations faded away long ago, but Latvia told a different story. Fragments of those ancient people still survive genetically, not in museums, not in legends. In living humans, that discovery spread rapidly through scientific circles because it challenged one of Europe's biggest historical assumptions, the assumption of total replacement. Historians once imagined ancient Europe like falling dominoes, one population replacing another completely, again and again. But DNA revealed something messier. Older groups survived, partially, quickly, hidden beneath later civilizations. And nowhere was that survival clearer than the Baltic region. But then something changed. Researchers started comparing Latvian DNA with ancient Scandinavian remains. At first, the connection looked small, minor overlap, nothing dramatic. But deeper analysis revealed repeated patterns, shared ancestry components, ancient northern signatures. Possible migration links across the Baltic Sea. Suddenly, the sea no longer looked like a divider. It looked like a corridor, a frozen highway connecting prehistoric populations. That possibility terrified traditional historians because it suggested ancient northern Europe was far more connected than previously believed. Small communities may have traveled coastlines for thousands of years, trading tools, sharing genes, spreading survival knowledge, and Latvia may have stood directly in the center of that network. A crossroads hidden beneath snow and forest, no one expected what came next. Another DNA study revealed traces connected to steppe populations from Eurasia. Horse riding groups associated with massive prehistoric migrations, groups linked to language expansion across Europe. Their ancestry appeared inside Baltic genomes too, but the mixing pattern looked unusual. Older hunter ancestry remained stronger than expected, meaning Latvia did not simply absorb newcomers completely. The ancient populations endured alongside them, side by side, generation after generation. That contradicted older theories of violent replacement. Instead, the Baltic story became something stranger, a slow blending of worlds, hunter tribes, steppe migrants, early farmers, all colliding in the north, and buried inside modern Latvian DNA, their echoes still remained. Scientists began reconstructing ancient faces from skeletal remains, broad cheekbones, light eyes, heavy winter clothing, people shaped by brutal northern climates. When those reconstructions appeared publicly, many viewers felt uncomfortable because the faces did not look alien. They looked familiar. Almost modern, as if prehistoric Europe was staring directly back at them, and that realization created a deeper emotional shock. The ancient world suddenly felt close, too close, not distant history, not disconnected civilizations. Ancestors, real human beings whose bloodlines survived against impossible odds. Researchers studying burial customs noticed another pattern. Some Latvian graves showed continuity across centuries. Tools remained similar. Food traditions remained similar. River settlements remained similar. The outside world changed repeatedly. but parts of Baltic life stayed remarkably stable, like time moved differently there. That stability may explain why older DNA survived longer. Isolation slows change. And the Baltic forests created natural isolation everywhere. Gdos woodland, freezing winters, long dark seasons, ancient communities adapted to survive together. Outsiders struggled to dominate those environments fully. Even medieval crusaders described Baltic territories as difficult and mysterious. Wild lands beyond easy control, that reputation lasted for centuries. And perhaps that isolation protected more than culture. Perhaps it protected memory itself. Because DNA is memory, a biological archive carried silently through generations. Every child inherits fragments of vanished worlds. Most disappear over time, mixed away, diluted, forgotten. But in Latvia, some fragments endured. And this is where the story gets strange. Because the deeper researchers investigated ancient Baltic ancestry, the more they realized Europe's center may not have been the true keeper of ancient genetics. The edges survived better, peripheral regions. Remote coastlines, northern forests, places ignored by empires, places overlooked by history. While major civilizations expanded and collapsed, Baltic quietly preserved older layers beneath the surface. Like amber trapping insects for millions of years, Latvia trapped genetic history, perfectly preserved fragments from prehistoric Europe, and that discovery carried another implication. Modern identity suddenly became complicated because nations feel ancient, permanent, stable, but genetics revealed something different. Human history is movement, collision, adaptation, survival. No population remains unchanged forever, yet some carry deeper echoes than others. Latvia became one of those echoes, a living connection to Europe before recorded history, before kingdoms, before borders, before modern civilization shaped the continent. And that realization unsettled many researchers, because if ancient ancestry survived this strongly in Latvia, what else survived unnoticed across Europe? What other hidden histories remain buried beneath modern nations? What if the official story was only partial? That question has never been fully answered. Today, scientists continue sequencing ancient Baltic remains. Each new skeleton adds another piece, another fragment, another whisper from the past. Some discoveries confirm earlier theories. Others destroy them completely. The mystery remains unfinished because history is no longer written only in books. Now it is written in blood. And somewhere beneath Latvia's forests tonight, ancient graves still wait in darkness. Undiscovered, unopened, silent, holding answers nobody has seen for thousands of years. By now, the evidence was impossible to ignore. Latvia was not genetically ordinary, not even close. The country had preserved one of the oldest surviving ancestry layers in Northern Europe. But researchers still faced one final mystery. Why here? Why did these ancient genetic traces survive so strongly inside Latvia while disappearing elsewhere? That question led scientists towards something even darker. Population collapse because ancient Europe was not peaceful. Entire communities vanished repeatedly. Climate disasters destroyed settlements. Diseases spread silently through migrating populations. Wars erased tribes before history recorded their names. Most ancient bloodlines simply disappeared, absorbed, replaced, forgotten forever. But the Baltic region behaved differently. Again and again, Latvia remained partially isolated from massive demographic collapse, not untouched, but protected enough. Like a hidden pocket surviving while the rest of Europe transformed around it. And that survival created a genetic time capsule. Researchers studying ancient plague periods noticed something strange. Several Baltic populations appeared less genetically disrupted compared to heavily populated regions farther south. Major trade centers changed rapidly, but remote northern communities changed slower, which meant older ancestry patterns endured longer. That may explain why Latvia preserved prehistoric signatures so unusually well. But then something changed. A controversial study compared modern Latvian DNA with some of Europe's oldest hunter-gatherer remains. The overlap was undeniable. Certain ancestry components survived across thousands of years, longer than many scientists believed possible. One researcher described it carefully. Parts of prehistoric Europe are still alive in the Baltic population. That sentence spread everywhere because suddenly ancient Europe stopped feeling dead. It became visible, living, breathing, walking modern streets. And this is where the story gets strange, because the discovery triggered emotional reactions nobody expected. Some Latvians saw the findings as proof of deep ancestral continuity. Others worried genetics would be misunderstood politically. Scientists repeatedly warned against simplistic interpretations. DNA does not define human worth. It does not create superiority. It only reveals survival, movement conjunction, but public fascination exploded anyway, because people everywhere wanted the same answer. Who were our ancestors? And Latvia suddenly held part of that answer for all of Europe. The Baltic region became a window into prehistoric humanity, a surviving echo from a world erased elsewhere. Researchers reconstructed migration patterns again, this time using genetic evidence instead of ancient assumptions. The map looked chaotic, not clean, not orderly. Wave after wave of movement crossed Europe. Hunter tribes moved north after glaciers retreated. Steep groups expanded westward. Farmers arrived from the south. Everything mixed together slowly, violently sometimes, peacefully other times. And Latvia stood directly at the collision point. Not isolated from history, protected inside it. That changed the meaning of the entire story. Because the Latvian people were not survivors of one ancient population. They were survivors of many, a living archive of prehistoric Europe itself. And buried inside their DNA was evidence of humanity adapting through impossible conditions for thousands of years. Ice ages, starvation, war, migration, disease. Still the bloodlines continued. Still the memory survived, and that realization carried enormous emotional weight, because modern humans often see history as distant, separate, disconnected from everyday life. But genetics destroyed that illusion completely. The ancient world is not gone. It still exists inside living people, inside every heartbeat, inside every generation. A child born in Latvia today may carry fragments of humans who walked northern Europe after the glaciers melted. Fragments older than pyramids, older than Rome, older than written language in much of Europe. That connection is almost impossible to fully understand emotionally. Thousands of years compressed into living DNA, the dead never fully disappeared. Part of them survived, quickly. And perhaps that is why this story feels unsettling, because it forces one terrifying realization. The past is not behind us. It is inside us. Every nation carries buried histories, lost migrations. Forgotten ancestors, survival stories, most remain invisible until science exposes them, and Latvia's hidden origin became one of the clearest examples ever discovered. But even now, the mystery is unfinished. New excavations continue every year. New graves appear beneath forests and construction sites. Some remains still contain DNA scientists cannot fully explain. Unknown ancestry fragments, unexpected migration patterns, pieces missing from Europe's historical puzzle. And somewhere tonight, beneath frozen Baltic soil, more answers still wait. Hidden beneath roots and stone, silent for thousands of years, waiting for someone to uncover them. Because the empires ended, the kingdoms collapsed, the borders changed, but the blood remained. And somewhere, right now, inside an unopened grave beneath the forests of Latvia, rests the last piece of the story. We just haven't found it yet.